Hey
There we
there.
go.
Welcome to the Author's Way podcast, a journey to finding your voice. My name is Jennifer Wright, and I am your podcast host. And today I am very pleased to have Doug Tatum with me. Doug is the author of No Man's Land, a survival guide for growing mid-sized companies. Doug is also the chairman of Newport LLC, which is a national partnership for CEOs and senior executives who advise emerging middle market companies. I had the pleasure of seeing Doug at an event a couple of weeks ago, and he has some very interesting insights about middle market companies, small companies, and I'm excited to share some of those insights. But I'm also excited that he's going to be able to share some insights about his book. He uses his book in some interesting ways, and I thought you would like to hear those because I do get a lot of questions about what are the best ways to use the book in addition to selling it. So he's got some insights for us today. I think that would be great for all of the authors out there. So we'll get to Doug in just a second, but before that, let me just remind you that this podcast is brought to you by Wright. Our superpower at Wright is turning business owners and executives into published authors. So we help them through the writing process, help to get their information out into the world through publishing a book. If you have a book in your head, in your heart, in your soul, and you're struggling with getting it started or getting it finished, head over to our website, execuwright.com. That's EXECUWRIGHT.com. Take a look at our programs, reach out and schedule a strategy session. Would love to hear your story and know more about what you have going on. So, Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm looking forward to this, Jennifer, and it was fun meeting you. I guess it was a week or two ago. I have to put a plug in for the fact I'm a faculty member down at the Jim Moran Institute at Florida State University too. So,
oh, awesome! Yeah,
it was fun talking with you, and fascinating with what you're doing. So, look forward to this. You said I could smoke a cigar. And,
absolutely.
We're in good shape.
Absolutely. I should have brought a glass of scotch with me. So
it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Exactly. Always. So I was really interested I was very interested in your talk. I mean, you shared some fascinating information about small businesses and mid-market businesses and private equity firms and how they interact. So I'd love to hear some of those insights, and I'd love to hear some of your insights about your book. So tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Well, currently I chair a consulting firm. We work with a lot of emerging growth companies, and then, as I mentioned, I teach, and then I run a small, what they call a micro seed venture capital fund. So that's my three worlds split between there. But back to your point, I think the most fascinating thing you said in your introduction is, do you have a book in your soul, in your heart, whatever the case that, and if you go back in my career, I was chairman CEO of a consulting firm that's still out there. We sold it in 2010, bears my name, and my brothers, who's I always give credit for founding it, but I led that for 20 years. But the material for the book came out of the exposures that we had serving as fractional CFOs for emerging growth companies. So I think the first thing, it was a pattern of failures. In fact, the later editions of the book are called No Man's Land, Where Growing Companies Fail. It's interesting. My original publisher, my publisher, Penguin, thought that was too harsh to put on the cover. But after a few editions of it, I was able to take the mid-market survival guide and turn it into No Man's Land is Where You Fail. So it all came out of exposure out in the marketplace. And I don't think I ever intended on writing a book, but I was really driven to communicate what we were seeing out there with all these companies. And so that, I think your point about why are you doing it might be more important than anything you could ask yourself as it relates to being an author.
That's a really great point. And I love what you were saying about the failure. I am fascinated with failure because I think that's where we get our growth. That's where we get our learning. That's where we get, and there's so many interesting stories that come out of failures as well. So that's one of the things I'm always talking to people. I love the success stories, but I really love the failure stories.
Well, I don't trust anybody that hasn't failed, because that means that they're lying to start with in a business context. So, you know, if you know, the second part is, the character qualities that we all admire in people, whether it be courage, tenacity, resilience, all of that comes out of failure. You're not going to get any of that out of a success. So yeah, no, there's, I spend my life around entrepreneurs that are, you know, swinging for the fence, or having a transition from being small to large. It's very, very difficult. And, but it's a, oh God, it's wind in your sails to be around folks that have failed and yet got up and got back on the mat again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are really the people that I want to spend time with. And people that are comfortable with talking about it. Because if you're just to your point about the resilience comes from being able to fail and survive it and share it with other people and help other people learn from those experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
So I was fascinated with our conversation that we had about how you have used your book. I get a lot of questions from people, and I can feel a lot of nervousness when I talk to people who want to write a book. I'm afraid I won't be able to sell it. I'm afraid I won't be able, people won't to buy it. And one of the things that you talked about is you don't necessarily focus on selling your book. You use it. There's a lot of other ways that you use it. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would start at 100,000 feet and say, if there's something that you feel like you need to say and document and elicit, if you will, or illuminate, then it doesn't matter who or what or when somebody wants to read it. I think you do it to put a monument to your thoughts, so you can look at them and see if they hold up, and that's the process of writing to start with. So it was a kind of an aha kind of thing, where I captured this notion of no man's land around the 4 M's, which was a framework. And it's interesting, I started with a pamphlet and not a book. I just wrote this down to illustrate what I was seeing, and I found a lot of people interested in looking at it. Again, I never thought about selling it. I was actually approached by somebody who wanted to do an article on it in Inc. magazine. So they interviewed me about the concepts, and apparently the article went viral. And that's when effectively the publishers found me. So the first thing was, getting your ideas out, testing your thoughts with your peers, framing it, debating it within yourself is the process of writing. Once the book was published, I'm sure my publisher wished that I had done all the things you're supposed to do to sell books, but I never was motivated around that. The book has sold steadily over a decade, I guess, or more now. But what it opened up for me was a huge opportunity in the public speaking arena.
Mm.
So I probably, to this day, and I don't know, what is the publishing date on that thing? 2010 or 11 or 9? I don't remember.
Looks like '08.
Oh, 8. Okay.
Yeah.
So think about that. That's, what is that? 14 years ago.
Right.
And I'm still being scheduled all summer long, doing, oh, well, you heard one of them, a talk
Yeah.
to audiences around the country on this concept called no man's land. We're growing up where their companies are too big to be small, too small to be big. So I think number one was it turned me into a thought leader in that area, which is a lot of fun. And I can convey that back to students at Florida State. And then also it's become very, very helpful in obviously in the practice that we deal with at Newport. Because we had sold the firm, I guess, 24 months after 2008, after the, I guess the book was sold. So, it provides thought leadership. It provides opportunities to do public speaking, which might be terrifying to some people, but trust me, if you've got something to say, you'll figure out a way in your own style to do it over time. And you can start with small groups. And then finally, it becomes very, very much of how you position yourself, if that's still where you are in your career and what you want to do, your value proposition out there, because you become a thought leader.
I really do like the idea of those in either trying to move into executive level positions or moving, within the, into more senior levels from an executive perspective. Having books, I think it can be a very powerful tool to help with career growth. And like you said, establishing yourself as a thought leader.
Yeah, and again, trying to be a New York Times bestsellers list. I think I made the bestsellers list in London, believe it or not. But there's all sorts of tricks people do to sell books and get on lists, but that's not the objective. If that's what's driving you, then I'm not sure you're going to have enough gas in the engine to get there. If what's driving you is you really believe you have an insight that could be helpful, then how are you going to communicate that?
Right.
A book's a great way to do it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So as you were writing the book, did you write the book by yourself? Did you have a writing partner? Did you, how did you really kind of start that process and move through that process?
Well, I'm a CPA, I'm a financial guy by background. And I can write, but I've never written a book. And so when the publisher came to me, I said, I'll be glad to do it so long as you find a by my side editor who has two backgrounds. And I literally set this up so that they couldn't find one. And I guess fortunately for me, they did. So I said, I want somebody that writes Harvard business case studies, but also writes novels, because I want to tell stories. And I'll be damned if they didn't find somebody, Seth Schulman. So a lot of the stuff, Jennifer, you do with your writing that you had talked to me about earlier, and I think it's a misnomer. It's not ghostwriting, because I wrote a lot of this stuff. But what was interesting was this is a professional writer who could create some consistency of voice that, you have to do a lot of writing to do that. I'm really good in a 1 or 2 page memo, and getting things done succinctly. But if you're telling a story, sometimes you want somebody that can be a little more descriptive. And so that was an incredible help to do that.
Nice. I like that. So you tried to set yourself up to fail, but they didn't let you.
Yeah, they found a gentleman who literally was involved in writing Harvard case studies and was writing novels.
That's awesome.
He could tell a story, but he understood business.
Right. I love it.
So as I'm translating, I'm using him as a focus group. This is what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's one of the things a good writer or someone who's really good with that process should be able to help do that for you. That's one of the things that I found with sometimes we just need an editor in some cases just to help us make sure that it's an unbiased source. Someone who may not already know the content, they can just listen to it and say, yeah, this is going to make sense to the audience.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get one of those.
Yeah, that's great. How did you kind of determine who your audience was for your book? Or did it just kind of come natural with the content?
The content drives you to the audience, which is businesses that feel like they're, entrepreneurs that feel like they're too big to be small, too small to be big. More specifically, as part of this, I ended up wanting to prove more academically that there was this unique transition. So I spent a lot of time getting Dr. David Birch out of retirement at MIT. Mm-hmm. The first diagram in this book cost over $1 million, just the one diagram, because that was getting David Birch out of retirement, who was an applied mathematician, brilliant, a national treasure. And he had a time series database, and I asked him to go see if there was anything unique about these companies in a certain segment that he could tell in the data sets over time. And sure enough, it ended up being companies with employees from about 20 employees to 100 employees. That's about $7 or $8 million in revenues up to 30 or 35 million. So that group of employers, entrepreneurs, driven companies, have unique characteristics. So I was able to match that data insight with my anecdotal observations from being the chairman CEO of a consulting CFO company where I was seeing all this happen. I mean, it started on a kitchen napkin, really, not a kitchen Mexican restaurant. I was sitting down with my brother saying, my gosh, these patterns of failure are so consistent. It's like they're in no man's land. And boom. It's like if you've ever been around songwriters, they talk about the hook.
Right.
That's
the hook.
What it was.
Yeah.
It was the hook.
That's a pretty good hook. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the things that I as I've read through your book, it is a hard balance to get when you've got a lot of data to share. It's very easy to get caught up in all the data and forget about the story. And I thought that you did a great job of including. So you did a great job with your writer of making sure that there was a lot of story in there to tell the story of the data, not just presenting the data and the numbers, because that can get kind of dry pretty quickly.
Yeah, entrepreneurs. I mean, if my audience entrepreneurs, I mean, obviously there's a subset of them that have an affinity to that. pure data, but
Mhm.
but the reality is a story creates a picture in somebody's
Right.
head, and what you're really dealing with entrepreneurs is an enormous amount of an emotional. If at this stage of the business, if the business is good, then that must mean I, the entrepreneur, am good. If the business is faltering, that must mean I'm the entrepreneur is bad. And you have no idea how many people, I mean, thousands over the years, have come up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I read the book, and what it told me was it wasn't me. It's the territory I'm driving through." And that was
Right.
a huge relief to a lot of people. You're not going to do that with data. You're going to do that when you hear another entrepreneur talk about how they feel about the issues that
Mhm.
we talk about, the inflection points and the transitions, when you're too big to be small, too small to be big.
Right. Right. That's a great point. I always say that story helps make that personal connection, because otherwise it's very hard for people to continue to want to listen to what you're saying. So
Well,
the
people don't have the time. People don't
right.
have time anymore. I mean, if it's not worth the time exchange, then that's why I suggested that if you're going to write a book on something, you need to have a sense that you have an insight. And
Mhm.
there's ways of testing that, like I did. I put a small pamphlet together, and people would sit down and go, "Wow, that makes a lot of sense to me," and that got going. So you can test your idea. If you're a little bit concerned about jumping off the cliff to say I'm going to finish a book, then maybe you ought to create some white papers and some things like that, and hook them together and see what the reaction is. Do folks turn around and go, that changed my trajectory? Now we're talking about in a business context right now. That's my world. I'm sure there are books that are in all sorts of different places, but in my world, that would be the way I would think about it.
That's really a great idea. I hadn't thought about it quite that way. And there's a lot of ways that you can get information out there, like you were saying, to test. There's blogs, there's other types of articles, other types of content that people could use to test that. That's a great idea. I'm going to start using that if
Well,
you're
that's
okay.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So, what else have you got going on right now?
Well, I've taken a little break for the summer from classes, but I thoroughly enjoy engaging with young folks at Florida State University. Um, the firm Newport is also fascinating because we have a group of 50 really world-class men and women who've kind of been there, done that are serving as Sherpa guides for going companies, which is amazing because you get exposed to almost an unimaginable breadth of how people solve problems and make money out there. It's just fascinating. And then we have like I said, a small micro seed fund where we're investing in everything from one of what we think is a breakthrough in the cyber area to a medical device, that's going into human testing in Britain by the end of the summer. So
Oh, wow.
it's like intellectual, like a big buffet of interesting things.
That does sound, it's got your hands in a lot of different things. I love it. Keeps things
Well,
interesting.
yeah, keeps you from being bored, that's for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the time you spent. Before we go, though, I always ask my guest the same question because I'm always interested in what you're reading or what you have read. Are there any books that you have read yourself that have been inspiring, or anything that you're reading right now that you would recommend?
There's a book, oh Lord, that I just finished up, and it's called The Fourth Great Awakening. And what caught my attention was this was a professor at the University of Chicago that got the Nobel Prize. So anybody that got that prize, but what he was an economist who interprets history through data. It's either the third or fourth great awakening. I forgot the name of it. I go look in there real quick. But what's fascinating is you had someone who takes the American experiment and he built massive databases of everything from nutrition to health to average wages and then he interprets the consequences and the societal changes in the context of this data. And the I think it's the fourth great awakening, or maybe it's the third great awakening, was his prediction of what would happen in the future. And what was absolutely fascinating to me is he's no longer with us, but a lot of what he said would happen is the front page headlines in the cable news shows and the newspapers right now. So it's a fascinating book. Not easy, because he is but it is fascinating. One of the few books that I spent a lot of time just, underlining stuff.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. That does sounds very interesting. It's always interesting to find something that is done in the past that you can really see start to show up now.
Yeah, he's no longer. He died maybe 10, 15 years ago, but he looked at American history in these epochs, and then he predicted the last one, and it is absolutely fascinating that he looks to be spot on.
Wow.
We'll see, because we're in the middle of it, as he predicted.
Right. Wow. You've piqued my interest. I'm going to have to go check that one out. All right. Well, before we go, is there anything else you'd like to share? Any other big insights that you have?
Well, I'm working on a course called Profit Sense, because one of the things I've learned is that profit has become a dirty word
Mm-hmm.
In the culture, and it is very ill-defined and, believe it or not, unbelievably misunderstood. So we're going to have a course on that coming out for executives and their staffs out of FSU here pretty soon. In fact, I was working on it today, and I'm behind, but it's probably there's a book there, but I don't know if there's enough. If I can smoke enough cigars to get another one out. So we'll just keep it as a course, I think.
Okay. And is that something that's going to be available for outside of the university? Okay. All right.
Yeah, it'll be a kind of an employee executive education class
Okay.
that we're going to have ready hopefully by the end of the summer.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to share that information once it's ready, we can share it with this audience. And I think there'd be some people who'd be interested.
Super.
Yeah. I always find that interesting, what you're saying about profit. I always find it interesting that a lot of people focus on revenue and not as much on profit.
Well, and philosophically, I defined two definitions of profits in front of a group of students one time, and ultimately in a survey to the general public. And one definition was profit is the amount that your customers knowingly provide you over your cost for the value they've received, right? So philosophically, you wouldn't be profitable so long as your customers have other choices, unless you're creating a value exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like applause for what you're doing. The other
Right.
definition was profit is what a company extracts from its customers to their disadvantage without their knowledge. The vast majority of the public, if you ask them how profits are derived, would answer number two. That's what we
Oh,
found in the survey. And which is remarkable, because if you understand how profits are actually derived and how you have to compete for those votes from consumers, you're shocked. And so it's a fascinating and intriguing story on how we got here.
yeah. Yeah. I'm interested in learning more about that. That sounds very interesting. I would love to know more about that once that's available.
Well, we'll when I get a draft of it put together, then let's sit down and talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. Would love it. Well, thank you so much. I know you're busy. Your time is very valuable, and I appreciate you spending some time with us. Some really great insights. Love hearing about what you're working on and the insights you have on your book. I really appreciate that. It's helpful to me, and I'm sure the audience will get a lot out of it as well.
Well, it's a compliment to have you interested in it. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. All right. Well, until next time, I have enjoyed this today, and to the audience, I am looking forward to the next time we can get together. So, and this is the Author's Way. Thank you.